Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Paul was finishing preparations for the most important celebration in his life, his wedding. He fastened cufflinks with tiny diamonds, adjusted the golden pin on his tie. The 30-year-old lawyer, Paulo Chegavadze, looked impeccable. With his dark eyes and black hair, he was a handsome man with well-defined facial features and a rugged chin. The illustrious princely surname was inherited from his Georgian father, George, who left his young wife Dolores and their child shortly after his son's birth. The parents of the Prince of Soviet times considered themselves a prestigious match, and from the very beginning, they opposed George's choice. However, despite his immense love for his mother and respect for his father, the son stood his ground and, without parental blessing, went his own way. When Paulo came into the world, Dolores couldn't dedicate as much attention to the proud Georgian boy as she had before. Goga, also known as Georgie, or George Vaktangovich, initially became sad, then bored, and eventually asked for leave to his hometown with an incredibly unusual name, Mtsvainkovsky. He went to visit his mom and dad but never returned. Instead of Goga, Dolores received a copy of the divorce certificate in the mail, along with a package. In it, the young mother found a bag of walnuts, mandarins, a gold necklace with malachites and diamonds, and equally rare earrings with a ring. The set looked exquisite. There was also a letter from her former mother-in-law. In it, Tamrico asked for forgiveness from her daughter-in-law while justifying her cruelty toward her son and grandson with life circumstances. She confessed that George's divorce was forced, and the initiator of the process was his own mother. It turned out that in Georgia, her mother had already found a suitable family for him in terms of status and financial position. Although discussing princely lineage in the early 90s was at least absurd. The Chegavadze family considered themselves true descendants of Georgian rulers. Tamrico wrote that George had greatly impressed the daughter of a wealthy neighbor. She became infatuated with the young man and demanded this gift of a husband from her father. In return, the in-laws bought the young couple a huge mansion in Kutaisi and deposited a simply staggering amount into their account. Live and enjoy. For the next 17 years, the Chegavadze princes dutifully sent money to Dolores, a very decent sum. She initially wanted to refuse, but then reasoned that Georgian financial support from her in-laws would help raise her son, provide him with a good education, pay for clubs and sports sections. Dolores had a strong character. Her father was a military doctor, a lieutenant in the medical service, Matteo Rubio. From childhood, he taught Dolores discipline and the ability to withstand any difficulties that life may throw. Neither George nor his family were seen again. But as life showed, this didn't mean they wouldn't interfere in her only son's life. She hid the jewelry for Paulo's future wife and his children. The son turned 25, and he fell in love seriously for the first time. To say that Mari was beautiful is an understatement. Her snow-white hair, elegantly styled, sky-blue eyes, perfect facial features, and the figure of a graceful statuette could drive anyone crazy. And being half Georgian, no doubt about it. Young Chegavadze once came with friends to a small private gallery hosting a joint exhibition of young artists. 3 works struck him with their depth and unique presentation. Looking at the authorship, the young man read, Mariana Velasco. Sergey, do you know who this is? He nudged his yawning friend, clearly distant from paintings and artists. Ah, what? Ah, is that Mari? Not very well. Julia is friends with her, so what? Decided to buy a couple of masterpieces from a young talent? Yes. Introduce me to her. Call Julia. Where is she wandering? There, where lobsters and champagne with brandy are. Where else could Florence roam at a social event? I'll call her now. 10 minutes later, an ethereal creation stood before Paulo, emitting a light that seemed to radiate on a physical level to Mariana. The girl smiled, and the semi-prince Paulo Chegavadze Montero lost his bearings. They quickly found common ground. And it turned out that the young people had common interests with a high percentage, as the official message put it. Mariana, or Mari, as Paulo affectionately called her, Both loved historical films, folk music, fish in any form, cheese, and dry red wine, ice skating, and simply living and breathing to the fullest. Mariana lived alone. She was raised by her aunt, as her parents died when Mari was 14. Her maternal aunt was a cheerful, active, and very human woman, so there was no shortage of suitors for Sylvia Vargas, even in her 50s. Sylvia didn't particularly stand out in terms of beauty, even in her youth, but her plump lips, lush, black hair down to her waist, and incredible charisma gave her such charm that could outshine any beauty. And Sylvie also adored and knew how to cook better than any chef. For years, she collected various recipes and cooked incredible delicacies from them. As it's known, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. One of her admirers was particularly persistent, wealthy, and had a good sense of humor. He could send Sylvie a bouquet of magnificent expensive roses in a huge iron bucket or arrange a real concert under her balcony at night, inviting folk musicians. Initially, neighbors tried to express their feelings about such barbarism through the grand and mighty swear words, but the musicians played so well that the concert eventually became a household event. Thus, the valuable prize in the form of Sylvia fell to David Esteban Guerrero, and he took his wife to the USA, where he had long established business and a big house. The aunt left the excellent 3-room apartment in the city center solely to her niece, but she hadn't managed to transfer the ownership to Mariana. Just 2 months later, they moved in together and filed an application with the registry office. They lived in Mariana's apartment. Firstly, she invited Paulo herself. It was more convenient for her that way. One of the rooms was turned into a studio by the artist. Secondly, Paulo didn't want to inconvenience his mother, and Mari wouldn't have gone to the 2-bedroom flat in an old building with him and his mom. The apartment left by the aunt had high ceilings, decent square meters, and, besides, the building was located almost next to the theater, which was also important to Mariana. Paulo was practically flying, feeling like the happiest person in the world. Dolores took a liking to the girl right away, and she fully accepted her son's choice. When Paulo and Maris came for their blessing, she crossed them with an icon, then opened a chest and took out ancient jewelry that she had kept all these years. Here, Mariana, this is for you. This is a family relic of the Chegavadze princes. And soon you will become a princess too, you will join the family. Smiling, she handed the future bride a box with a necklace and a ring with earrings. The girl cautiously took the present in her hands, and her breath caught. But this is an exact copy of the set that Safiko Kontrashvili had. It was even named after her creation, beautiful Helen. Sunshine, who is that? Surprised Dolores asked. My short-term mother-in-law was named Tamrico, not Sophia. Sonora Rubio, she's a Georgian artist. True, she's not as famous as, for example, Nico Safronov, mainly because she lived at the end of the previous century. Exactly the same set is depicted in one of her portraits. Helen of Troy is portrayed in it. Yes, that one. And she's wearing this exact set. Safiko had no relatives. At least, that's what the newspapers wrote. Shortly before her death, she died in the 40s right after the war. Kontrashvili donated the set to the Georgian National Museum, which is located in Tbilisi. But a month later, the jewelry mysteriously disappeared, and there were no signs of a break-in. It seemed as if the necklace and the earring ring had simply vanished into thin air. Everything was in a special container under glass. So, the container remained intact, but there was nothing inside. So they never found it? With his mouth open from curiosity, Paulo asked. Dolores couldn't come to her senses from what she heard, and with an almost reverent horror, she examined the incredibly beautiful ring and earrings. The latter were a long elongated diamond-shaped piece made of bright green malachite with patterns. Tiny diamonds ran along the edges of the decoration. The clasp was also adorned with diamonds. No, even though the capital specialists were involved in the investigation. The set vanished without a trace. And so what, Mari? Maybe my grandma was so impressed by this painting or this decoration that she simply copied it and asked some jeweler to make a replica. Maybe, Paulo. But if this is your family heirloom, then who and when made a copy of it? Everyone fell silent, and then they decided not to delve into it. After all, the Georgian princess Paulo Chegavadze wouldn't have stolen this set from the country's main museum on her tiptoes. Imagining this epic scene, the theft of historical jewelry by his own grandmother, Paulo chuckled. The next day, Mari called her aunt, and she became emotional, happy for her niece, and then said that Mariana simply must come to her for a week to collect the wedding gift. Senora Vargas explained that she couldn't come herself. Senor Esteban's anniversary was coming up, and everything needed to be prepared, as he was busy providing for their small but very close-knit family. Aunt Sylvia agreed to cover all the costs of Mariana's trip. Mari couldn't refuse the only blood relative, and 2 days later, she flew to Washington. She took the ornament with her. She still wanted to show it to the immigrant jewelers and find out if it was the same set. Upon arrival, she called Paulo, said that everything was fine. Tomorrow she was going to the former Odessite named Solomon Schneider. The thing is, his grandfather made beautiful Helen in 1900. Mari didn't return. 2 days later, Senora Vargas called Paulo's number and burst into tears. Inside the young man, everything turned cold. He understood something terrible had happened. But he couldn't even imagine how terrible and irreparable it was. Mariana is no longer with us. She died in a car accident, Sylvia barely managed to say. Paulo, it's my fault. And why did I invite Mari here? Please forgive me, we will bury her in Washington, in a closed coffin. Mariana was burned beyond recognition. It was a terrorist attack. And it was her taxi that was returning from that jeweler. Yes, I will send you the set. It fell out of the car window during the explosion. Only the ring was missing, Sylvia sobbed. But I will compensate you. Senora Vargas, may the Lord be with you. What compensation? Paulo managed to squeeze out. And when is the funeral? I will come. In 3 days. You'll make it, my dear, of course, of course. I'll arrange an electronic ticket for you. Just show your passport at the airport. Paulo hung up. He couldn't grasp anything and couldn't process the information he had received. He called his mother and asked her to pick him up from Mariana's house. Staying here was beyond his strength. He put Ludwig, a huge gray cat, in a carrier, took a bottle of whiskey from the bar, and poured himself a full glass. He drank it in one gulp, without any nibbles. Soon Dolores, who was also in shock, arrived. Mari's delicate lace wedding dress hung on her shoulders, and a tiara lay nearby. Senora Rubio carefully packed the dress and the ornament into a box and put it in the closet. She was doing all of this on autopilot, but held herself together for the sake of her son. Paulo completely fell apart, finishing a bottle of American moonshine in almost an hour. She helped him up from the couch, grabbed Ludwig and a small bag with her son's personal items. At home, Paulo barely made it to the couch and collapsed onto it, without undressing. He had a strange dream, which would repeat regularly over the next 5 years. Mariana stood on a high mountain, and next to her was a very beautiful dark-haired woman in a sparkling dress with long sleeves. She held a set of emeralds in her hands, set in gold, which she then handed over to Mariana. I'm alive. Paulo, I'm alive. You should look for me. You'll find me by the ring. And believe that everything will be fine, she said in the dream. You need to come. Paulo, son, wake up. You need to get ready for the trip, he heard his mother's voice, struggling to wake up. Paulo got up heavily, packed his things, and called a taxi. The funeral was quiet, as Mariana had no friends in the States. Sylvia gave him the family relic, and Paulo, without looking, put the box with the jewelry into his backpack. He returned to his hometown and fell into a deep depression. His friends had already become seriously concerned about his mental state, so they sent Julia Flores to him, who had once introduced him to Mariana. Paulo had made a very good impression on her from the beginning, but since he chose Mari as his girlfriend, Julia stepped aside not to interfere. And youth took its course. Paulo slowly began to recover. 5 years later, he and Julia filed a marriage application. During this time, Paulo graduated from university, opened his own law firm, and established good connections not only in the business world but also among law enforcement agencies of various levels. He had earned a reputation as a smart and, which is rare among his profession, an honest lawyer. He would not take on a case if he understood and saw that he was dealing with an obvious fraudster or scoundrel. Of course, there were unconventional situations. How could it be otherwise? Once, a former classmate who worked as a police detective called him and asked him to defend a young woman accused of a series of thefts from jewelry stores. Paulo was surprised by why a policeman was asking for help for a murderer, even if she was a suspect. It must be something personal. He came to Isidro's house in the evening and asked him to shed some light on this story. It turned out Paulo was right. Michael had fallen for his suspect, and there was plenty of reason to. Her photograph revealed daring emerald eyes. Combined with raven wing hair, a Greek nose, and high cheekbones, the girl looked stunning. Isidro explained that the girl's name was Kate, and she. Yes, she was guilty. Holy moly. Isidro, what do you want from me? You know I don't defend professional criminals. I know, Paulo, but she promised me she would quit if she could avoid prison. She's already done time. She'll get the full package. Isidro, have you gone crazy or something? You're not planning to marry her, are you? What about your service, your career? You've been dreaming about this job since the first year. She won't quit. Do I need to explain the obvious truths to you? People like her don't quit. She's part of the system, just as you are in yours. Even if she really wants to get out of it, her people won't let her go. Remember that plot from the song about the criminal girl? They'll just eliminate her, and they'll kick you out of the police force. Paulo, don't tell me anything. Just help me, okay? And Paulo agreed to take on the case, and he managed to break down the prosecution's version. Kate left the courtroom with a 3-year suspended sentence. Isidro resigned from the police, and they left together with Kate. But 3 months later, he learned that they had been found shot point blank on a highway somewhere near the border. Paulo realized that the love of his friend's life, the green-eyed beauty Kate, not only didn't quit on her own, but also dragged Isidro into her dark affairs. Just some kind of Carmen sweet. After that incident, he once again promised himself never to defend clearly criminal clients, even if his own mother asked him to. Paulo looked at himself in the mirror again and suddenly remembered that he hadn't bought cigarettes. Well, his favorites were only sold near the metro station near his house, and there was still time. He rushed out onto the street, bought a couple of packs, and suddenly noticed a woman lying on a bench. She seemed vaguely familiar to him. White, but dirty hair, very thin, and some ragged clothes, but it was clear that she was a young homeless woman. He approached closer to see if she was alive and nearly lost consciousness. Mariana was lying on the bench, or an exact copy of her, which was itself an impossibility. He tried to wake the girl up, but she showed hardly any signs of life, so Paulo called an ambulance. He waited for the medics and asked which hospital they would take a patient without documents to. He gave the name and surname of Mariana, deciding that he would sort it out later. He made it to the marriage registry. He didn't tell Julia anything for now. The celebration went off smoothly, only Julia looked at her husband strangely a couple of times and even asked, "Paulo, everything okay?" "Of course, kitten," Paulo replied. Barely waiting for morning, he rushed to the hospital to the woman he had saved, who looked so strangely similar to Mariana, but he wasn't allowed in. "Who are you to her?" the doctor asked. "I'm her failed husband," Prince Chegavadze's answer stunned this man. "Ah, well then, of course," the doctor responded seriously. Your so-called failed wife just had a simple fainting spell. Oh my God. And what now? Will she recover? Does she even remember who she is, where she's from? She will recover, for sure. We've taken all necessary measures. Just wait. Can I see her? Only briefly. I'll escort you. Paulo was led into Mariana's room. He looked at her almost transparent face and emaciated arms, and suddenly he noticed her well-groomed hands and the same perfect face as 5 years ago. Strange, he thought. If she's been homeless outside of society, where does this grooming come from? Suddenly, Mariana opened her eyes. Without breaking eye contact with Paulo, tears streamed down her face like a river. The girl began to sob, trying to break free from under the foredrip. A nurse and the doctor who had let Chegavadze in rushed into the room. Have you gone crazy or something? What are you doing? Nothing. I just came over. Leave immediately. Paulo watched as Mariana screamed. They gave her an injection, and memories washed over him like a wave. There they were, kissing on the grass, running hand in hand, filing a marriage application at the registry office. All of this passed before Paulo's eyes like a documentary film. Julia called. They had bought tickets for a honeymoon trip to Lake Banyoles. Why Banyoles? Julia wanted to, and after Mariana's death, Paulo had lost the desire to argue. No, of course, he liked Julia. A girl with a tan, black curls, and the same black eyes, but there wasn't the same ecstasy as with Mariana, even though his wife was great in bed, and you could talk to her about anything, from politics to society gossip. But when Paulo saw Mari, and he no longer had any doubts that it was her, his heart suddenly raced. And he realized that Julia was beautiful, but she wasn't his woman, and the love of his life was lying under the foredrip, and only she knew what had happened to her. But not going to the registry office with Julia would be sheer callousness. For 5 years, she had pulled him out of depression, fed him, watered him, supported him, saved his nerves. But the horror was that he didn't love Julia Flores. He respected her, was grateful, wanted her as a woman, but he didn't love her. At least, that's what he was thinking right now. The realization that Paulo had made a mistake came right after he found Mariana. But what to do with this realization, Chegavadze didn't know. He decided to tell his wife everything. Julia listened, her eyes wide, and her mouth open. Are you sure it's Mariana? You buried her yourself. I'm sure. And the coffin was buried closed, if you remember. She's been appearing in my dreams for the past 5 years, saying she's alive. I think something unusual happened, and Mari didn't die, she got into trouble. We'll have to wait until she fully recovers. And now what? Are you going to divorce me? Juliet unexpectedly asked, lowering her head. Paulo felt ashamed of his selfishness. He didn't even try to hide his genuine interest in the resurrected Mariana. But he had become so accustomed to Julia's role over the years, seeing her as both a mother and a caregiver, someone who bore witness to all his sufferings, that he didn't think of her at that moment as a woman. Come on, Julia. We've been together for so many years. We're husband and wife. He embraced his friend and patted her head. Don't cry. We just need to help Mariana. She has no one here, and her aunt has no idea she's alive. Once she recovers, we'll have to inform Sylvia. He said this only to calm his innocent wife. He said it and understood that the beginning of their official family life could now be considered its finale. But not now, not right after the wedding. It's just impossible. Julia stopped sobbing and buried her face in her husband's chest. You had such a look in your eyes, I was so scared. I thought that was it. Paulo left his phone number with the attending doctor, and 3 days later, the hospital called him. The doctor said that Mariana had regained consciousness and asked him to come. Paulo dropped everything and rushed to the hospital without telling Julia. Mariana was sitting on the bed, smiling sadly. Hello. Hello. Mari, it really is you. It's me, Paulo. Don't rush me. I'll tell you everything, but gradually. Mariana gathered her thoughts and courage. I'm not an artist, Paulo. Well, I do draw, of course, but I'm not an artist. I'm a private investigator. Yes, don't look at me like that. I have an arts education, and I have exhibitions, but I make a living doing something else. I have a small private agency. I opened it 6 months before I met you, but I kept this fact hidden for various reasons. My parents worked in the police, in a special department investigating serious crimes, searching for historical values, missing documents of high significance for the state, people. Of course, I wasn't allowed access to classified documents, but I learned the principles of detective work by being around my parents. They died in a car crash while searching for a unique set of jewelry, but I don't think their death was accidental. Most likely, they were eliminated, as they say in detective series. Mariana took a sip of mineral water from a glass on the nightstand and looked up at Paulo. This jewelry, Paulo, was called Beautiful Elena and belonged to Sofiko Kontrashvili. It disappeared many years ago. I told you the truth. But a month before I met you, a woman came to my agency. She said she was Sofiko's great-granddaughter and wanted to find the missing Malachites. When I asked her how, she said she had a plan, but she'd only share her thoughts with me if I took an advance fee for the work and agreed to take on the investigation. My curiosity was piqued. And when this Danya named her fee, my interest in the case acquired a more practical form. How much did she offer? 500,000 euros. She gave me 250,000 in cash at the embassy, and I hid the money. But it's not just about the money. I was intrigued, and it was my first major case. If I could have foreseen how this could end, I would have shown that lady the door without a second thought, along with her money. She told me that there might have been 2 sets, the original and a very good copy. The copy was made by a jeweler whose first work dated back to 1900. As I told you before Sofiko's death, she donated her set to a museum, after which it disappeared. And here's where it gets interesting. In the 1940s, there was a copy in the museum, not the original. And the real Beautiful Elena had been in your family all these years. Your great-great-grandmother, after remarrying, took the Schneider surname and, Paulo, she lived in America. And before leaving, she gave the case containing the jewelry to her daughter, Paulo Chegavadze. So, did great-great-grandfather of that American jeweler to whom you took the jewelry for appraisal swap the set? But how? What? Why didn't you tell me anything right away? I don't understand. I just didn't have the chance. It didn't work out right away, and now imagine my state when you gave me the Beautiful Elena as a wedding gift. I didn't know what to think. All sorts of thoughts came to mind, and then I remembered that the client mentioned the Schneider jewelers, who had immigrated to the USA in the early 20th century. I contacted the lady, asked her to talk to her husband. After all, he's an entrepreneur and has been living in America for a long time. And Uncle David really helped. He found contact information for Solomon Schneider. I took the set with me and flew to the States. What happened next? And where were you all these 5 years, Mari? I went to Solomon, showed him the set. He got excited, noticeably nervous, then offered me coffee with brandy. I had a drink and I don't remember anything else. I woke up alone in a hospital room. Turns out, Paulo, it was a very exclusive mental institution. In the USA? No, in our homeland. They didn't want to take any risks. What if I ran to my aunt? But how did you get out of there, and... Wait, if it was about the Malachites and they sent you to the loony bin, and the jewelry was stolen, what did they pass on to your aunt and then to my mom? True, there were no rings there. And who was buried instead of you? Schneider brought a copy to my aunt, one that disappeared from the museum in 1940. I don't know where the ring is. Maybe it got lost. It turns out the jewelry was taken from the museum by a tour guide, the husband of your great-grandmother's niece. So, the Schneider family ended up with both the copy and the original. The latter she gave to Tamrico, your grandmother. And she took the copy with her to America. A little later, her husband asked what happened to another set, and she confessed that she gave it to her daughter, who stayed in our homeland. There was an uproar. But returning the set that remained in Soviet Georgia was no longer possible. They weren't exactly mobsters, just regular swindlers. Of course, all the male members of the Schneider family knew this story, and that's when my aunt's husband, Senor Esteban, found him. He brought a photo of the set and asked if he could appraise the jewelry and provide a description. Can you imagine his state? He extracted all the details from Uncle David, assured him he'd do everything properly, and started waiting for me. He and his son had already decided everything about me. If the Malachites are genuine, they plan to put me in a mental institution on medication for a couple of months, stage a false funeral, and that's it, I'd be gone. Who would believe a homeless woman without documents after an official burial? And for added assurance of their innocence in my death, they even handed over the copy that they had kept all these years. Well, handed over is a strong word. They left it near a wrecked car. Who was there? No one. The car was empty, and they probably buried an empty coffin or some nameless pauper. So, you spent 5 years in a mental institution? Of course not. When all the commotion settled down, they let me go. They even issued new documents. I've been Maria Cruz for almost 5 years now. A simple name, inconspicuous. But how did you find out all this? You won't believe it. When I regained consciousness in the clinic, they brought me a cell phone, and after a while, it rang. It was Schneider. He told me everything, not hiding or hesitating about anything. I think he did it because the coffin with my supposed remains was already in the ground, and I was far from home and my grave in the USA, so in case anything happened, they would just send me back to the loony bin. Wow, Paulo could only say. I lived in a monastery for a while. Then I found a job and rented a place. I recently returned to our city. The thing is, after being drugged up in America, they somehow transported me to a provincial town. Who knows why they chose that specific town? Maybe they had some connections there. When I barely got out of that institution with a new passport and 500 euros in my pocket, which the Schneiders generously gave me, I was disoriented in space. Of course, they didn't give me a mobile phone. I could have called my aunt or you. I sat on a bench, and the Mother Superior of the monastery came and sat next to me. She looked at me and, without asking anything, said, "Well, come with me. You'll live with us at the monastery. Nobody will bother you there. You can tell everything there." And we went. I didn't really have a choice. I barely understood what was happening at all. She brought me to a women's monastery. I rested in a cell, and Sister Evangeline nursed me with some herbs. Finally, I started to think clearly, remembered everything that happened to me. And I also remembered that I had been buried. Before I could come back to life, I needed to figure out what kind of mess this was, why they drugged me, and then tried to get rid of me. But I had no money, no connections, no support whatsoever. So, I decided to leave things as they were for now and live in the monastery. After all, the Lord had sent me Evangeline for a reason. In my state, I could have encountered anyone. I told my story to the Mother Superior. "You really can't reveal yourself right now. Live here. I'll tell the abbess that you're a distant relative of mine. Then we'll figure something out." Mariana eventually fully regained her strength and asked Sister Evangeline if they had paints, paper, or even pencils. The nun asked why, and when she found out that Mariana was an artist and a restorer, she was very pleased. The monastery's archives contained many icons in need of restoration and repair. To paint icons, she needed permission from the monastery's higher authorities and their blessing, but Mariana was content with even this. "God himself sent you to us," exclaimed Evangeline. "Well, who sent whom to whom is still uncertain," Mariana said sadly. For years went by this way. During that time, Mariana got involved in icon painting. She felt good within the monastery's walls, but she still had her family, and she didn't want to live under a false name anymore. She needed to take action, step out of the darkness. She consulted with Evangeline, and she approved of Mariana's decision to try to fix the situation. Evangeline gave Mariana some money for the journey and for the initial period. Mariana bought a train ticket and left. In the same train compartment with her was a woman with a small child, and it didn't even cross Mariana's mind to suspect her of anything sinister. The woman spent the whole journey telling Mariana about escaping from her tyrant of a husband. He drank, beat her, never let her go anywhere. And when their daughter was born, he became even more cruel. For some reason, he believed the child wasn't his. Mariana listened, nodded, but decided not to reveal anything about herself. After all, during her years in the monastery, she had grown and used to interacting with ordinary people. Mariana mostly stayed in her workshop or in her cell. Of course, she helped with household chores and during major church holidays, maintaining the status of a laborer. People in this category were individuals not part of the monastic community but obligated to observe the rules and regulations. In return, they received shelter, food, clothing, and a roof over their heads. However, this work wasn't paid by the monastery, so Mother Superior helped Mariana with money from her own pocket. She couldn't give much, but for Mariana, the allocated 2,000 euros were a substantial support. There was nowhere else to turn for more. To the monotonous rhythm of the train wheels, the girl fell asleep. When she woke up, neither the unfortunate neighbor nor her 2-year-old daughter were anywhere to be seen. I guess they left while I was sleeping, she thought, reaching into her bag to get some money and buy something to eat. The journey was supposed to take 2 days, and she had almost nothing with her, just a few candies and a couple of cottage cheese pastries. But her wallet wasn't in the bag. Mariana was overcome by cold sweat. Nervously, she started searching for her passport and ticket. Thankfully, her documents were still there. Then she noticed a note on the table. She unfolded it and read, "Sorry." It was clear that the neighbor took the money. It wouldn't have been difficult for guess, they didn't have any other neighbors above or on the sides. Mari scraped together 50 cents in change and bought a bottle of water from the waitress for the entire journey. Fasting had become a habit for her, and besides, she could stretch the candies and pastries over 2 days. It was quite normal. When she reached the city center, unexpectedly for herself, Mariana suddenly collapsed right on a bench, precisely at the moment when Paulo, running past, spotted her. He sat down and stared at Mariana without taking his eyes off her, then asked, "Where did you hide the money?" "In the attic, in an old trunk with the old photographs in your mom's apartment." "Where?" "Oh my God, Mariana. What if Mom had found that money? Can you even imagine what she would have thought?" "She might have thought I robbed a bank," Paulo smiled. "But in 5 years, we've never once gone up to those attics, so the money is there. Let's do this, they're discharging you in 3 weeks. I'll find the money during that time and rent an apartment for you. You need somewhere to live. And you won't get into your apartment if your aunt hasn't sold it at all. And we're flying together to Mtsvainkonski. I think it's time for me to have a talk with Grandma Tamrico. But what about Julia? You two just got married. Julia is going on an internship to England. What do you think she'll choose, a Georgian village or London?" "I feel awkward, Paulo. It doesn't seem right. Listen to me, Julia's doing fine now. She has a great, well-paying job, the status of a married woman, money. She doesn't need my or anyone else's help. But you have no one here except me and my mother, and you really need support and assistance. I can't tell my mother anything for understandable reasons, so it's just me. Mariana, we're not strangers. It's awkward when you can help a good person, but you don't. That's it, it's decided." Of course, Paulo was being deceptive. It wasn't just about his desire and noble urge to help a good person. It turned out that he hadn't fallen out of love with Mariana. He felt it with every cell of his body. The pain had subsided, the emotional wounds had healed, but he remembered Mari. She often visited him in his dreams. Yes, they hadn't known each other well. They probably hadn't really gotten to know each other, but Mariana was his woman, unique and irreplaceable for a lifetime, like Helen of Troy for Paris. Julia was more like a friend. He enjoyed being with her in bed, but his feelings didn't blind him, and the sensation of flight didn't pursue Paulo with her like it did with Mariana. When Dolores went to work the next day, Paulo climbed up to the attic. The small brown suitcase sat forlornly in the corner, covered in dust. Paulo reached up and pulled down the luggage from the attic ladder, getting covered in dust in the process. He wiped the suitcase with a damp cloth and opened it. On top were black and white photos that captured his parents, young and happy, some people Paulo had never seen before. He lifted the photos and found several bundles of 5,000 banknotes secured with a rubber band. Quickly, Paulo collected all the bundles and put them into a specially prepared box. Then he dialed the number of a real estate agency where his college mate worked as a lawyer and asked him to find something decent, a 2-room apartment with a large kitchen but not in the city center. Preferably in an expensive residential area of the city, free from close neighbors or rowdy foreigners, troublemakers, overly cheerful neighbors, and sudden water outages. Oops! Did you get yourself a mistress? Well done, you handsome guy. You just got married, after all. Although you've been living with Julia for a while now. There's probably a certain weariness from each other, right? Cut the nonsense. A client approached me with this request. He has some relatives visiting, but his wife doesn't want to see any paupers on her precious squares, as she put it, let alone entertain them. Paupers? But where did the money for elite housing come from then? Well, the client isn't poor. He has money. He's the one calling the shots. All right then, I'll find something. Bring your lady with you, said the friend with a chuckle. Idiot, Paulo thought irritably and went home, not forgetting to discreetly put the suitcase back on the attic without the secret. He locked the door carefully and left. His half-naked wife was rushing around the house, packing her 5th suitcase. Julia, for heaven's sake, where are you going with all that? You can buy things in London. They have seasonal sales all the time. It's cheaper than in our capital, by the way. Many people from the capital purposely fly there to buy brand name items. Paulo, I'm going for half a year. I took autumn clothes and jackets. It's cold in England, by the way. And there are fogs there too. And no one will see you through that natural curtain with your fur coat. And in the fog, they'll mistake you for some Canterbury ghost or Jack the Ripper. Why Jack the Ripper? Am I that scary looking? Julia, in her underwear with fashionable multicolored rollers in her hair and one fluffy slipper, looked so endearing that Paulo couldn't resist and grabbed his wife, lifting her up and twirling her around the room. I misspoke. Not Jack, but July the Ripper, because you're like possessed, ripping through all the stores. They packed their things, loaded them into the car, and headed to the airport where 2 more colleagues, who were lucky enough to be included, were already waiting for Julia. The girls chatted away, and Julia, after quickly kissing her husband on the nose, scampered off. She could easily switch from one thing to another, especially when it came to unpleasant or problematic situations. Julia had quickly pushed the thought of the possible loss of her husband due to the resurrection of his first fiancée out of her mind. Interestingly, she hadn't even once asked Paulo to take her to Mariana or shown the slightest interest in her fate. Paulo immediately went to the agency, paid for the apartment for 3 months, and received the keys. Mariana's new home was indeed in a decent part of the city. 2 decent rooms furnished with high-quality furniture and a large wall-mounted TV. The luxurious bathroom had a jacuzzi. Paulo understood that Mariana had probably grown accustomed to such luxury, and yet he knew she had never really welcomed these bourgeois joys, as she called them. Mari had a refined taste. She was more drawn to the aesthetic aspects of life, but Paulo wanted to delight her. Afterward, he went shopping, buying clothes and everything she needed, including groceries. He remembered Mariana's size perfectly. Over these years, the girl had not gained weight but had become even slimmer. It made sense the monastic life wasn't conducive to rich meals, although they knew how to cook there. Paulo had once been to a monastery for work on Easter. A novice was accused of stealing church utensils, but the young man clearly wasn't involved, and he was simply framed. They invited him to the table, and the variety of dishes overwhelmed Paulo's eyes. Everything was delicious. After moving everything to Mariana's new home, Paulo went to the hospital to pick her up. He helped her into the car, and they set off on their journey. Mariana stared out of the window, amazed at how much the city had changed in just 5 years. Many streets were hardly recognizable. New little shops, pharmacies, and bars had appeared. Soon they arrived at the right address. Paulo escorted Mariana to the apartment, opened the door. "Here we are. Make yourself at home." Mariana kicked off her shoes, walked into the room, and saw clothes hanging on hangers, bags with various items that would make life more comfortable and cozy. "Is all of this for me?" "Of course." "Thank you. I'll head to the bathroom then." "Haven't been in a real bathtub for ages," the young woman smiled. While she splashed around, Paulo set the table. They sat down to dinner, just like in the good old days. After a couple of glasses of wine, Mariana started to nod off. Paulo lifted her up, laid her on the couch, and himself settled on a small bench in the kitchen. He woke up early, before 6 in the morning, and Mariana was already brewing coffee. The divine aroma spread through the apartment. "How long have you been up?" "Monasteries rise early. The routine there is stricter than in the army." "What are we going to do next?" "I booked 2 tickets to Green Cape. Tomorrow we're flying to Georgia. Granny doesn't know that we're coming, but I have the address. I haven't told my mom yet that you're alive. I only said that I wanted to visit my father's homeland, see my grandmother if she's alive." Mom didn't object. "Green Cape? Where's that? Why do we need to go there?" "We were planning to go to Mskitakanchi. That is Green Cape, just translated into our language." The day passed in a flurry of activity. Paulo visited his mother, then his own place, packed for the trip, but beforehand, he asked to see the set of jewelry that Sylvia had passed to him after Mariana's false death. "Why?" Dolores was surprised. "I want to take a photo of them and ask Grandma how exactly they ended up with these." Remember, when Mariana was still alive, she told the legend of the set that disappeared from the museum before the war? She was surprised how this rarity could end up with us, the Chegavadze family. "Why are you suddenly remembering this?" "Oh, just because I'm going back to the historical homeland, Mom," Paulo smiled. However, it seemed Dolores had suspicions. She was, after all, a mother and knew her only son well. Lately, she had noticed some oddities in her son, but attributed them to his recent marriage. After all, for any man, marriage is a significant step. Paulo quickly photographed the jewelry, hugged his mother, and hurried away. The next day, he and Mariana boarded the plane and, after a few hours, found themselves in sunny Caucasus. Mskitakanchi was a small Georgian village located 8 kilometers from Batumi. And no one would have known about this village if it weren't for the famous Batumi Botanical Garden and the magnificent pebble beach with crystal clear water. 200 years ago, this village was a beloved vacation spot for Russian nobility, merchants, and industrialists. Old Russians built houses and summer cottages here so that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren could also enjoy the sun, sea, and fruits. However, the revolution and the subsequent Soviet rule shattered all those plans by constructing their own. Private wealthy homes were turned into sanatoriums and vacation homes for the working class. And in the mid-20th century, even a cable car was built here, connecting the beach with the sanatoriums on the hills. Then came the collapse of the Soviet Union and Georgia's independence from the USSR. The symbol of progress, the cable car, turned into ordinary rusty junk. Paulo double-checked the address, and he and Mariana got into a taxi. The cheerful driver hummed and told stories throughout the short drive, laughing contagiously. Their passengers' moods noticeably improved, and they began to smile back. Soon, they arrived at a large, beautiful house. Paulo and Mariana paid the fare, exited the car, and headed towards the house. An elderly woman sat in the gazebo with a cup of coffee and a small smoking pipe from which she emitted fragrant smoke. Seeing the guests, she stood up and walked towards the gate. "Who are you here to see?" Paulo was about to introduce himself, but the mansion's owner suddenly stared at him with wide eyes. "Oh my God! This can't be! Paulo, is that you? If you're Tamrico, my grandmother, then yes. It's me, Paulo. Come in. Why are you standing there? Come in. Vaktang, come here. Immediately, quickly. Tamrico, why are you shouting like a peacock? I'm coming. What happened?" From the garden emerged a colorful elderly man. He looked like a classic Georgian, tall, stately, with a distinctive hooked nose, black eyes, and a completely gray head. "Meet, Vaktang, this is your eldest grandson, Paulo. Pavliko. Oh my God, it can't be," he repeated, echoing his wife. Hustle and bustle began. Under the grapevine, they started setting up a large table, and the young couple was led to the best room on the second floor. The household members gazed at them with undisguised curiosity. "They took us for a married couple, otherwise they wouldn't have allocated a single room for both of us," Paulo said, looking at Mariana. "We won't have to reveal all the details, so we'll have to sleep on one bed, sorry Mari." "No problem. I've been sleeping on even harder surfaces for the past 4 years, but I still managed to fall asleep quite quickly, so I think I'll conk out on this mattress right away." 2 hours later, they were invited to the table. There was everything imaginable. Raw and smoked ham, lots of greens and vegetables, large pitchers of wine. Flatbreads were baking in the tandoor, and fragrant kebabs were grilling on the barbecue. At the table, Paulo and Mariana were surprised to see around 20 people. "These are your relatives, Pavliko, and our best friends," his grandmother explained. "Hello. My name is Paulo, and this is Mariana." And so it began. The wine flowed like a river, one toast following another. This Georgian feast is called supra. Traditionally, the table is covered with a blue tablecloth. This is an ancient tradition that originated in Georgia in the 18th century and must not be broken. The blue color was chosen for a rather mundane reason. At that time, indigo dye was in use and freely available among few, and linen was common. The celebration is led by a Lurdzi Super, usually a specially invited toastmaster. But here, this role was taken by Paulo's grandfather, Vaktang. By the way, during large Georgian feasts, only white wine is served, as it doesn't raise blood pressure and can be consumed in larger quantities. The first toast is always for God and peace, then for Georgia, and the third for ancestors. When the Lord was distributing land to the nations, the Georgians, as usual, were sitting at a table feasting. Paulo Chegavadze began. After reveling to their heart's content, they finally came for their share, but all the parcels of land had already been distributed. So they turned to God and said, "How is this possible, Almighty? When everyone was in line for land, we were toasting to your health." The Lord was so touched that he gave us Georgians a small, but the best piece of land with tall mountains, swift rivers, and the purest air. And that was Caucasus. How can we not raise a toast for such a gift? The feast ended well past midnight, after all the songs were sung and the most interesting stories were told. Paulo carried the quite tipsy Mariana to their shared room, helped her take off her shoes, and laid her down in bed. He settled next to her. Soon, they fell asleep without realizing it. Georgian wine and the clean mountain air had worked their magic. In the morning, they were greeted by the aroma of coffee, unlike any they had ever smelled in the city. Looking out the window, Paulo saw that Tamrico was brewing his jazz, placed in hot sand. "Come out, my dear." Seeing her grandson's head sticking out of the window, Tamrico called out. Paulo and Mariana freshened up in the modern bathroom and went downstairs. On the table, there was a pitcher of wine and a pitcher of Aaron, a traditional yogurt-based drink. Freshly baked khachapuri, cheese, and fruits lay nearby. "Let's nurse ourselves. Do you have a headache?" the hostess asked. "No, surprisingly not," Paulo said in amazement. "You truly are Chegavadze." Suddenly, he heard his grandfather's satisfied voice behind him. "I've never had a hangover either, and I could drink 4 pitchers like that in one evening." "Vaktang, you might have been able to drink 4 pitchers like that, but it only happened twice in your life, and both times I had to call emergency." Paulo and Mariana, the latter sipping the Aaron in huge gulps, nearly burst into laughter, but held themselves back, remembering the fiery Georgian temperament and the sensitivity of the male representatives of this wonderful nationality. "Ah, what are you saying, woman? It wasn't a real emergency. Archil and Armin came to me with a 5th pitcher of wine in it, which we just didn't manage to finish before sunrise. We had to work in the morning. I am still a writer, after all." At this point, both guests and hosts couldn't hold back, and they all burst into laughter together. After the laughter subsided, Tamrico turned to her grandson. "Now tell us, what brought you to our land? Do you want to see your father?" "Unfortunately, that's impossible. George has long emigrated to America. We communicate through video calls, but he hasn't visited us once in the 20 years since he left." Despite her age, Tamrico didn't have a single gray hair. Her eyes were bright and insightful, clearly indicating that she possessed a brilliant intellect as well. She looked at the young man, so reminiscent of her George, whom she hadn't seen for 2 decades. When she separated him from Paulo's mother and went to meet her husband, who had dreamt of marrying their son to the daughter of a wealthy neighbor, she believed she was doing the right thing. In Georgia, it's not customary for women to contradict men, so despite her strong will and considerable influence over her husband, Tamrico didn't oppose the match. She didn't mind having a foreign daughter-in-law. She admired Dolores' calm demeanor, innate intelligence, practicality, and integrity. But things turned out differently. It was mostly Vaktang who grumbled. It was he who kept counting the money all those 18 years, trying to somehow make amends for his wrongdoing towards Dolores and young Paulo, who never got to know his father at a reasonable age. It became quite clear fairly quickly that Tamrico and Vaktang had made a mistake. The new daughter-in-law turned out to be spoiled and hysterical. She was constantly demanding something, always dissatisfied. George, due to his gentle and pliable nature, quickly transformed into a classic henpecked husband. They had a daughter together. And when the country entered another nightmare period, they sold everything they had within a month, got visas, and together with the parents of George's new wife, they left for America. It was there that the daughter-in-law gave birth to 2 more children, who essentially became Americans. They thought like Yankees and held the same peculiar values, if you could call them that. Considering that George's father-in-law managed to start a business and become wealthy by American standards, his grandchildren had everything they could wish for. The Georgian grandparents were never able to lay eyes on them, leaving the elderly Prince and Princess Chegavadze without a single son and grandchildren. To prevent themselves from becoming too melancholic, they invited their nephews and their children to their home. The cheerful voices of the little ones and their playful antics gradually healed the emotional wounds of George's parents. However, Tamrico felt her guilt grow stronger with each passing year. So when she saw Paulo at her doorstep, she thanked God for the opportunity to repent before him and somehow help him. "Tamrico, there's quite a story," mustering his courage, Paulo began to tell. The use of her name instead of Babwa, which is what grandmothers are called in Georgia, or even a simple granny, pained her heart, but she understood that she couldn't be Babwa yet. Right now, she was just Tamrico, and thank God, not Danya. "Well, it's quite a story," Paulo repeated, and with a sudden surge of determination, he laid out everything that had happened to him and Mariana over the past 5 years. Grandmother listened to him without interrupting, smoking a lot. "This is my fault, albeit unintentional." Placing her pipe on the table, Tamrico began. "This story, Mariana, actually started in 1900, but there's more you don't know. Solomon Schneider made not just one, but 2 copies of the jewelry set. Externally, the sets were indistinguishable. The difference was only in the rings because the second one, which later came into our possession, had a secret. Well, I'll tell you about that a bit later. Back then, in Soviet Russia, there was a gang operating in St. Petersburg that robbed jewelry stores. They used a very primitive method. A beautiful young lady would enter the shop, choose rings or earrings, try them on, and then run off. The owners behind the counter usually didn't have great reaction times, and the swindler, having run around the corner, would quickly put on a peasant's outfit that her accomplices were waiting with. These city folks, as they were called, even had special pockets where they would hide their stolen goods. In 1910, Polish artists, the Poniatowski's troupe, arrived in Petersburg. In general, at that time, there was an exhibition of rare diamonds in Petersburg, among which was a large Parisian pink diamond. They managed to steal it. I don't remember the details of how it happened. A manhunt began, and the thieves were being pursued. Meanwhile, Solomon was hanging around Petersburg, looking for an interesting jewelry story to resell. He caught the attention of the Kowskis, as they called themselves in Polish, which amused the criminal community, as it had certain associations with a part of women's attire. But the jokes ended as soon as they learned about the exploits of the robbers. For them, there was only one criminal authority, Madame Kowskaya, and no one else. The robbers feared no one and nothing. In short, they asked Solomon to buy the diamond. It was beautiful and expensive, but not worth $1 billion. Besides, the criminals were running out of time. Schneider bought it. But how to get it out? The police were not stupid at that time, and after a theft, they first checked all jewelers, and Solomon was known within their circles. He had the second copy with him. He took it in case a successful exchange or sale opportunity came up. He disassembled the ring, in which there was a small compartment. Tamrico lit her pipe and took a sip of coffee with cognac. And? Paulo and Mari asked in one breath. I think you've guessed that Schneider put the Parisian diamond in the ring and smuggled it from St. Petersburg to Georgia. Later, when my mother married him, she took the copy with the Parisian diamond. Apparently, Solomon planned to take it to the USA, which is why he left it untouched for a while. And that's why he had such a strong reaction when he found out that my mother had given these jewels to me. But where did you learn all this? Accidentally. You see, being a person greedy and utterly shameless, Solomon Schneider was also very sentimental in his youth. Dreamed of being a writer. A who? A writer. So he kept diaries, describing his affairs with women, cleverly conducted deals, and just all sorts of nonsense. With age, he abandoned this pursuit and forgot to take the diaries with him when he left the country, and I found them and sent them to your mother. Yes, but when Mariana supposedly died, the ring disappeared. It didn't disappear, suddenly Mariana said quietly. What do you mean? Paulo asked, already tired of being surprised over the last few days. I left it at your house. The necklace and earrings were in the same box, a big velvet one. And the ring, I hid it in your room, in your childhood hiding spot. Remember, you showed it to me? Under the floor. Oh, what a surprise, babe. So, is it still at our home, Grandma? A copy. The one with the ring that hides the Parisian pink diamond. The next day, Paulo and Mariana started packing to go home. Paulo approached Tamrico, who outwardly didn't show that her heart was breaking. Babwa, come with us for a visit. And take Grandpa with you too. Hugging Tamrico, Paulo said, Mom will be happy, honestly. So many years have passed. And you've helped us all these years. The coffee pot in the woman's hands trembled, and for the first time in many years, she let tears flow. She sat at the table, covering her face with her hands, and silently cried as tears streamed down her face. I'll go, grandson. Of course, I'll go. Vakhtang was pleased with the invitation, but he declined, citing an unfinished novel, an unsung grape harvest, and the suffering of his beloved Labrador, Vepko, who would surely die the day after his departure. In reality, he couldn't imagine how Dolores would react when she saw him. After all, it was he who shattered her life, insisting on divorcing their son and practically pushing him into a new Kabbalistic marriage. Tamrico understood his motive and supported her husband, not revealing Vakhtang's suffering. Yes, let him stay here. We really need to take care of the house. And the grapes need to be harvested and wine needs to be made, and that's not women's work. We can't disrupt traditions. Upon arriving, they stayed in an apartment rented for Mariana. Paulo didn't know how to tell his mother that he brought his grandmother with him and the supposed deceased fiancée who didn't go through 5 years ago, and also that he planned to get a divorce. Intimacy hadn't happened yet between him and Mariana. She was too emotionally overwhelmed by everything happening, and Paulo was afraid of hurting her. But he also knew that sooner or later they would be together. He was still incredibly drawn to her, as if she were a close relative. He also understood that in order to respect himself, he needed to tell Julia about his feelings and ask her for a divorce. Suddenly, the phone rang and Julia's name appeared on the screen. Well, there you go. Remember your wife and she's calling. Yes, Julia. Hey, Paulo. How are you? All right. And you? I'm not doing too well, Paulo. Well, you see. I'm pregnant. Paulo's eyes darkened. This message dashed all his plans for a happy future. Paulo, I'm sorry, but it's not your child. You know, these things happen. I fell in love. I pursued you for so long, and after finally getting you, I realized that you never truly loved me. But you never hid that, did you? He's English. I've already filed for divorce. Wait, but when did you manage to? We've been in a relationship for 3 months now. He came to our town, and you didn't notice a thing. Julia, it's all fine. Why did we even have that wedding then? You should have told me right away. I'm a reasonable person, noble-horned husband almost shouted into the phone with an almost happy voice. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought, we'll move to England, and things will naturally resolve themselves there, and I'll stay here, and you'll suggest a divorce yourself. You're not really angry, are you? Julia sobbed on the other side of the continent. I'm happy, Paulo almost yelled, but caught himself in time. This was all too much even for their vaudevillian situation. It was like a movie mixed with Germans. A resurrected bride, who died 5 years ago, thousands of euros found, a regained Georgian babwa, the Parisian diamond, and a pregnant wife, just not with him, but with some Englishman she apparently had been seeing right under his nose for the past few months before their wedding. Granny, Mari? What, darling? Both his beloved women answered simultaneously. Julia filed for divorce. She's pregnant. Wait, no rush, not with me. Mariana, will you marry me? Oh, Chegavadze, Mari replied softly. Where would I go now, away from you? Just one condition, we'll get married not here, but in the church that saved me. Paulo gathered his courage and called Dolores. Mom, it's me. I'm home. So quickly? Weren't you planning to stay a couple of months? Did you find Tamrico? Yes, Mom, and not just her. Mom, Julia is divorcing me. She's with another man, and she's expecting his child. What? Whose child? Probably an English lord's child. I don't know whose it will be. And I brought Tamrico and Mari with me. Mom, she's alive, but it's a very long story. We're coming to you. When they entered the house, Dolores was as pale as a ghost, but she regained her composure. Hello, Senora Rubio, Mari said softly. Oh, my God, darling. Dolores grabbed Mariana and held her close. Both of them finally burst into tears and somehow eased the tension of the situation. And here's Babwa, that's grandma in Georgian. And I remember how to say grandma in Georgian, Dolores smiled through her tears. Tamrico, come in. You're my only mother-in-law, albeit ex. I didn't get another one. An hour later, a table was set with wine brought from Georgia. Surprisingly, Mom and Grandma quickly found common ground, while Paulo and Mariana went to open the hiding place. The ring with malachite surrounded by tiny diamonds was indeed there. They took the box and brought it into the large room. Here. How does it open? We're afraid to break it, Mari said and placed the precious item on the table. Just a moment, Tamrico replied. She took out the ring, turned it in her hands, pressed a button, and the ornament opened. A pink radiance burst into their eyes, dazzling them with its incredible light. Oh my God, it's the Parisian. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Mom, are you expecting someone? No. Who could I be waiting for? Who's there? You're flooding us. Who are we flooding? Dolores answered, opening the door. A few seconds before that, Paulo felt danger, but it was too late. At the threshold stood Senor Esteban, Sylvia's husband, Mariana's aunt. And behind him, two hooligans. Well, hello there, girls, and boys too. You've done well, especially you, Mari. How skillfully you've manipulated everyone around you. Manipulated who? What are you doing here? And where's Aunt? Your aunt is knitting winter hats, even though in California, where I bought her a small house, they're not really necessary. It's very hot there. But for a woman of her age, it's a perfect pastime. Please, give me that beautiful ring with the pink stone inside. And he reached out his hand. But Tamrico managed to quickly snap the ring shut. Oh, you old scoundrel. I'll. And you'll be left empty-handed. Only I can open this ring. If you try to force it open, you'll damage the stone. What's going on? Uncle David? Oh, nothing much, niece. The client who came to you with the order for the ring is my sister. We've been searching for this unique piece for a while, and we decided to involve some young agency to do it blindly. Professional detectives would have figured everything out in an instant, and then we would have ended up with nothing. To get close to the ring, I even had to marry your foolish aunt. All this story with your car accident, funeral, and mental institution was my idea. Pretty cool, huh? I forgot to mention that before I became a businessman, I was. How can I put it mildly? Oh, the director of a criminal organization. I had a few dozen tough guys at my disposal, my own intelligence, my infantry. But most of our wonderful company ended up behind bars. I managed to escape with new documents and moved to the USA. My sister was already living there, and she became a close friend to Schneider. The Jewish idiot fell so in love with my Anna that he was ready for any nonsense. Well, almost any. Unexpectedly, Mariana leaped from her spot and lunged at Uncle David like a tigress. She clawed at his face, scratching his cheeks and then his hair. Taken by surprise, the man fell to the floor. The hooligans were reaching out to her, but suddenly, a special forces unit burst into the apartment. Get down! The soldiers commanded, prying Mari off her torn-apart victim. Should we too? Without a hint of panic, Princess Chegavadze calmly asked. Her composure could have made English aristocrats envious. A middle-aged man entered the room and introduced himself. Colonel Samuel Duran, Special Unit. Good evening to all. Will you open the ring for me? It's still a historical value, a rarity. Princess Tamrico Chegavadze, Paulo's grandmother, answered him in the same tone. Of course, my dear. Just show me your documents. Please, the officer smiled with the corners of his lips. While they conversed, the specialists lifted Uncle David and his hooligans and escorted them out. Tamrico once again discreetly snapped the latch, and Parisian dazzled everyone present. Take it, Colonel, and tell us what really happened and how you saved us from these hungry hyenas, Tamrico asked while puffing on her pipe. Wait. What about my aunt? If he's a bandit, what did he do to her? Don't worry. She's completely unaware of the situation. He didn't inform her. He probably did have some feelings for her, or maybe he simply didn't see any threat in her. We've already contacted her. She's flying here. We need her testimony. After all, they lived together for more than 5 years. And by the way, we informed her that you, Mariana, are alive. But how did you know that? I live under false documents. Speaking of documents, we'll help you restore all your rights and return to the world of the living. As for finding, the operation took 4 years to develop. We've been looking for this Uncle David of yours for a long time. And as for your being alive, we learned about that from our agent. She had been discreetly keeping an eye on you since you left for the USA and saw you being taken out of the house unconscious, put into a car, and driven to the airport. That's why the fake funeral immediately raised her suspicions. After we opened the coffin and found a huge doll inside, it became clear that you had indeed been taken somewhere. Your uncle, being a master of such tricks, indicated that. Operatives from the USA helped trace a lead, but you were no longer in the hospital. We accidentally found out that you had been in the monastery. Remember when you left the monastery for canvas and paints? I went once a month, yes, of course. And? Your former curator, Captain Eva Delgado, happened to be in the same city on assignment at that time. To avoid scaring you off and to figure out where you lived, she discreetly planted a bug in your bag. That's how we could listen to you and understand that you were not in danger. Well, the rest is technicalities. Did you also fly to Georgia with us? Of course. We didn't know what your Uncle David was capable of. But how did he track me down? I can't tell you that it's classified information. Maybe someday. But who is he, this David? 4 pairs of eyes were fixed on the colonel. Despite the fact that the clock showed it was already 2 in the morning, he decided that these people had the right to know the truth right now. His name is Alex Ticker, nicknamed Tick. He really was the leader of a criminal group in the 90s. He excelled in theatrically staged crimes and personal theatrics. When he fled abroad, he took a stash with him on which he built his business. And such things are not forgiven even after many years. As we say, there's no statute of limitations for crime. He was found in America and presented with a bill, and somehow he learned about the Paris stone. He offered the gem with the condition that his transgression would be forgiven and the entire debt to the Brotherhood would be written off. So the ring was vital for Tick's survival. Tick, criminals. Oh my God, muttered Paulo and downed a glass of brandy. Tamrico looked at him and did the same. After her, Dolores and Mari did too. Colonel, are you with us? Will you stay? Thank you, but no. I still have work at the office. So late? We have a flexible work schedule. Mariana and the Chegavadze family didn't sleep until morning, discussing what had happened. Mari, where did you learn to latch onto someone's face like that? Slightly tipsy, Paulo asked. I don't know, really. I don't know how it happened. I felt so upset for Aunt Sylvia. She had so many suitors, and she chose that scoundrel. After getting some sleep, everyone gathered and went to the airport to meet Sylvia. Mariana was noticeably nervous. Finally, she spotted a familiar figure approaching. Only the woman's head was shaking from side to side, and Mariana realized she was sobbing uncontrollably. She hadn't seen Mariana yet. The girl didn't wait for her to get closer. She rushed toward her. Auntie Sylvie. Sonora Vargas raised her head upon hearing the familiar voice, dropped her bag from her hands, and rushed toward Mariana. My girl, dear Lord. You really are alive. When they called me, I thought it was some cruel joke or that they'd start extorting money. Let's go home. I haven't sold your apartment. Your paintings, your things, they're all there. I couldn't. At this point, she saw Paulo, Dolores, and Tamrico. Paulo had driven them to the old apartment, then retrieved their belongings from the rented one, handed over the keys, and returned home. He understood that Mariana and Sylvia needed to talk and recover from all of this somehow. Then came the investigation, endless interrogations. Sylvia gave her testimony. She didn't go to court. Julia sent the divorce papers, and Mariana and Paulo submitted their application to the registry office again. But they decided to celebrate their wedding in Green Cape according to all Georgian traditions. There, thank goodness, there was no metro, and all the secrets had already been revealed. They arrived in Svankonsky. They were already husband and wife. They decided to have the wedding ceremony in a small local church. Sister Evangeline, of course, Sylvia, Dolores, and Colonel Duran agreed to accompany them. Senor Duran had been coming over to Dolores Vargas' place frequently after that incident. They were peers, from the same era of poets and physicists. They found each other interesting. Their interests initially revolved around theaters and exhibitions, but then they smoothly transitioned to personal matters. By age, Duran had long since become a retiree, especially since in his line of work, people retire earlier than civilians. But he didn't have a family. His wife had died young, leaving him with a daughter, and he never remarried. Irene, his daughter, had grown up a long time ago, and a late second love had come to the stern solitary wolf. Paulo was incredibly happy for his mom. When they arrived, Tamrico greeted them with her ever-present pipe in hand and vaktang. He approached Dolores and, looking straight into her eyes, said, "Forgive me, daughter. Everyone makes mistakes. I forgave you a long time ago, Senor Chegavadze. Let's go and marry off our children." The village celebrated for 5 days at the wedding. No one had married so grandly here in a long time, as true princes had become a rarity in the village. But the youth, like Tamrico and Vaktang's son, had scattered, and the grandchildren were born in the city, celebrating their events like city folks. Sylvia had a very hard time dealing with the breakup with Uncle David and his deception. Thus, she sat at the wedding, unusually sad and lost in thought. "I've never seen such May roses in my life," she heard someone say by her ear and turned around. Standing next to her was a man who looked like a real Gidget in traditional attire, even though he was white-haired. Gaziri, the special pouches for cartridges on his chest, were shining with real silver. His choker was adorned with the family crest, a leopard holding a fox in its teeth against a blue background, along with the motto "Courage will defeat cunning" in Georgian. Despite his age, the man looked very impressive. In his hands, he held a glass of red wine. At the wedding, they were not only drinking white wine. Such a celebration was considered one of the most important holidays. Sylvia was rendered speechless by the magnificence of the Gidget who had appeared. "Allow me to introduce myself, Zviat Chegavadze, a prince." Sylvia, a ballerina from the Grand Theater, the bride's aunt, unexpectedly replied to herself. "Really? I was wondering where I've seen you." "Well, if I'm a rose, then probably in the garden," Sylvia chuckled. An hour later, they were all laughing, drinking wine, and dancing. By the way, the newlyweds were also dressed in traditional costumes, and they looked great in them. During this time, Mari had regained a healthy complexion and her skin's softness. She looked incredible. "Come with me," Tamrico said to the newlyweds. She led them into a small room in the house where they had never been before. Icons were hanging on the walls, a Bible lay there. She picked it up. "I bless you, my children. Live in harmony." Then she took out a small box, opened it. Inside were 2 silver rings with red rubies, a man's and a woman's. "These are for you. This is also a Chegavadze family heirloom. And it's not a secret, but a genuine one. These rings belonged to your great-great-grandparents, Paulo." Paulo and Mariana accepted the gift, bowing deeply to Tamrico. How grateful they were to God that everything had turned out so well. Ahead of them was a happy and eventful life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.